Welcome. My name is John Peterson, and I am the curator of the Loeb Fellowship. The Loeb Fellowship is a fellowship, a mid-career fellowship at Harvard's GSD. And this is actually our 50th anniversary year. We graduated, so to speak, our first class in 1971, but that class started in the fall of 1970. It's also a year that we have decided to suspend fellows because of the COVID pandemic. This was a difficult decision for us to make, but we felt it was the best way to secure the value of the experience that we've held so close throughout these 50 years. We also have made a commitment to look at new programming during this year. And this is a series this is the first in a series of public programs that that we've created as part of that 50th celebration year. Some housekeeping before we begin. This is a Zoom webinar and not a Zoom meeting, so the features are a little different. The chat function has been disabled. You, the audience, are welcome to send in questions at any time through the Q&A button at the bottom center of the Zoom window. Please include your name, affiliation, GSD student, faculty, staff, Loeb alumni, and your location. Please also specify that your question is for the group or for a specific speaker. Tau Tavengwa will moderate questions during the Q&A session of this conversation. This is a conversation. It's a conversation, and Tau will introduce the specifics of it between myself, Jim Stockard, and Tau Tavengwa. But before I introduce Tau, I just want to thank Dean Sarah Whiting, who encouraged us to support and supported this series that you're witnessing now. I also want to thank the GSD Communications Office, who's been a terrific asset as we've developed this and always is. And especially I want to thank the Loeb alumni, in particular, Jim Stockard joining us now, and Tau Tavengwa. Tau Tavengwa is the curator of this series. We reached out to him when we began to consider what we wanted to do and asked Tau to help lead this effort. Tau is the co-founder and curator and editor of Cityscapes magazine, a hybrid journal magazine print title focused on cities and urban life across Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. He's currently a visiting fellow at LSE Cities, London School of Economics, and a research fellow at the Max Planck Institute of Religious and Diversity Studies. With that, let me introduce our wonderful alumni, Tau Tavengwa.
Thank you, John, and welcome everybody. I just wanted to, the two people that we're going to be speaking to today, familiar to, I think, all the Loeb Fellows out there. James Stockard was the curator of the fellowship for a 17-year period up to 2014. He's now teaching for his sins at GSD. Jim was a Loeb Fellow as well in 1978. John, Loeb Fellow in 2006, is an architect and has been the curator of the Loeb program, taking over from Jim in 2014, 2015. So this, as John indicated, is part of, I suppose, on some level, a fixer-upper program that has had to be put in place because of the circumstances we're in now. So what we have put together is a program that is, I suppose one could call it 12 separate moments that will happen in the that will happen from today, the first event, up to the and it will consist of 4 conversations like this, primarily between fellows. We have got this expansive collection of fellows from across the years, so this would be a really interesting moment to bring several classes together across the different years on topics that affect some of the issues the fellowship has been trying to grapple with for the last 50 years. The second part, these provocations, another 4, where we are essentially tasking, let's say, a few like alumni to share an idea and a provocation that will perhaps start off a different kind of conversation. And these provocations will be short bursts, hopefully really interesting moments that will feed into these 4 huddle rooms that we will be featuring as a series of events that will mostly be catered in the spirit of the fellowship for the last half century at creating a pathway to enable engagements between students, GSD faculty, and fellows and alumni. So this is the run of events that we will embark on. Details will be made available as we go. I'm sure from our plans at the moment, we should be having the second of these late October. So you'll be informed via all the necessary channels as we proceed. So that's where we're at, and that's where we're headed. So let's gentlemen get your engines ready. I thought we would sort of start off with a very difficult task, which is essentially asking you both to maybe just give us a quick outline history of the very unique set of circumstances under which the fellowship was founded. And really, perhaps you could share with us what the big idea was.
Tau, maybe that's directed at me primarily, as a little closer to the origin.
Yes, please, Jim.
Several things came together at the founding of the fellowship. One was the GSD was embarking on a big capital campaign, what was then a big capital campaign, a total of $6 million. John Loeb had been appointed the chairman of the committee. And of course, the chairman of the committee in a big capital campaign is expected to make a big gift. And Bill Doble, who was a junior faculty person at that point, was assigned to be a liaison with John. Now, so that's one set of events. But what was going on in our world at the time was a series of urban uprisings following the death of Martin Luther King. And to be candid, John Loeb was puzzled by that, I think is the accurate word. He didn't quite know why this was happening and why it would happen. And John was also very enamored of Harvard University. He'd been an undergraduate here, he'd become a donor to the university. And he pretty much was certain that if we invited a bunch of city planners and architects back to Harvard for a year, they would know exactly how to solve all these problems. And so working with Bill, who was very enamored of the Nieman Fellowship, John made a major gift to the university, half of it or to the GSD, half of it for the library, named for his wife, and the other half for the Loeb Fellowship. Bill had liked the Nieman Fellowship and several of its elements. First of all, it was mid-career, so these were not people right out of graduate school, but they were also not ready to retire. It wasn't an honorific thing. It was a full year of very few requirements, almost none, even fewer for the Loeb than for the Nieman. It was a cohort-based program. That is, there were a number of fellows at one time, not just one or two. And so there was an opportunity to learn from each other. And there was this great freedom to explore the university in all of its aspects, to do whatever one needed to do to improve the quality of their work. And so those things all came together. John and Bill became great friends. At the end of his time, in his autobiography, John said he thought the Loeb Fellowship was perhaps the best gift that he and Francis had ever made because of its ongoing and renewing impact on the world. So the context was not unlike where we find ourselves today, Tau. There were major social unrest going on in our country, and the fellowship was targeted to help professionals get more accomplished at dealing with those wherever they were in the environment.
So you were a fellow yourself.
True.
We've got this wonderful photograph there.
You did have to find that, didn't you, Tau? That's unfortunate.
Oh yeah, it had to happen. You're in the middle there with the big beard. It's class of '78. What was the biggest thing you took away as a fellow? What core experience did you get out of it as a fellow in '78?
I would cite two things, Tau. The thing I learned personally, and I think this is an important element of the fellowship, the thing I learned personally was that I love to teach. And that has formed a major part of my career for the rest of my life since I did the fellowship. And I've taught in a number of different settings, both professional and university related. And my friend Jane Rogers, who was in my class, she and I taught a class together. And loved doing that, and it became a fundamental part of who I was going forward. In a larger sense, I think perhaps the most important thing that I learned, if your audience looks to the far left-hand side of that photograph as they're looking at it, they will find a man named Henry Hampton. Henry's a filmmaker, and that was one of Bill's great insights, was we don't need just architects and planners. Why would you have a filmmaker in this class? Why? Because we're coming out of an era where race is among the most important and critical issues in our cities. And Henry makes films about race. Who better to introduce to the planners and designers who are in this fellowship than someone who can facilitate their conversations about this topic? And Henry did that with brilliance for our entire year. And I would say I grew substantially in my early understanding of the issues of race in cities and how we as planners, designers, policymakers might approach that question. And I think I grew a lot from my relationship with Henry and the questions he would ask and the provocations he would put before us.
So interestingly, John became a fellow under your curatorship. Yes, you can see. Sorry to you both. During your tenure as curator, you made some pretty significant changes to sort of, I suppose, some level the nature of the fellowship. One of the changes was you introduced international fellows to what had exclusively been an American fellowship. So it would be interesting to know why and how that has changed the character of the fellowship. And to you, John, as curator, you have sort of taken that mantle on, which is why I speak to you now. I am a fellow that is not from the US. Could we maybe speak a little bit? Jim, you go first, and John, please follow on as you can around this very significant change.
Well, Tau, it was very simple for me. It seemed to me very, very clear that we had a great deal to learn from international fellows. We were far from the best in the world at housing, at transportation, at urban design and planning. We're sprawling our cities all over the countryside. We were far from the best at social justice issues in our cities. And I thought that in introducing some international fellows would improve our quality of the work that we did by looking at different approaches to things. And I thought it was possible. There were some things that international fellows might learn from us. It was not a one-way street. We were perhaps a little more experienced at dealing with citizen engagement than people in many parts of the world were. There were some certain small areas in which we were environmentally a little ahead, at least in awareness, if not action around environmental issues. And so I thought there would be a valuable exchange. And I'll tick off a few things that I think we may have learned. It may have changed the fellowship, and then be interesting if John feels any of that. For one thing, at least I hope we learned some American humility. We're not the best at everything, and the extent to which we can learn to ask rather than tell, I thought that would be hugely important for our fellows. We did broaden our cultural sensitivity. Over the years, a number of fellows, American fellows, would say, you know, I talked to so-and-so and I realized they just look at things differently than we did. And the more I listened, the more I realized that that was something I should incorporate in my own practice. And so I think that was valuable. They had different points of view, different strategies. And I would say the international fellows came here and found, perhaps in getting to know American fellows quite well, they realized there's a range of Americans that we are not all alike. We are different, and there's some of us that bring particular gifts and others who bring other gifts. So I'm pretty convinced that this has been a net gain for the fellowship. John, let me ask you to react.
Yeah, you know, I came in, as Tau mentioned, under your creatorship, where not only was that a new innovation, this idea of having a global cohort, but I do want to point out that you also eliminated part-time fellows, not because you wanted to eliminate part-time fellows, but because you saw the real value of building fellowship, the opportunity to build true fellowship beyond the name, the verb, if you will. And that's something that we've continued. And additionally to that, you really filled out the experience of the fellows in a more significant way. So we're also taking this year to have sort of mini reunions with every single class, starting with the first class. And we've been having Zoom calls with those classes. So we're at about number 10 now of 50. And we're going to continue to do that throughout the year. And while there hasn't been any enormous revelation as I've talked to early fellows, simply because I was pretty aware of the history and also had an opportunity to interact with alumni over the years, even before I became curator. But what's clear is that Bill Doble really set the parameters, which have, you know, astonishingly stayed true to form. But he was also very hands-off. And that was, I think, very much part of his idea. I mean, it is intentional on his part. He does get more, he did become more active, sort of formally, so to speak, with the day-to-day life of the fellows. But it was really you, Jim, that really began to build in the weekly, I think you called them seminars at the time, we now call them forums, and both domestic and international travel, and a lot of the things that really shaped the fellows' experience. And we continue to do that to this day and try to improve on that. But as far as the global aspect of the fellowship, we've only seen that ramp up during my curatorship. And in part because I've allowed it to do that, and in part because it's just happened on its own. And maybe that's really the majority of it. We have really seen an increase in the number and frankly, the quality of international applications. And so and I'll just, say here, I made a kind of arbitrary, but felt like, sort of intuitive right thing to do at this moment in time, is I set a maximum of 50% international fellows as a way of, easing ourselves into the current state, and then we can reflect on the future and decide what that's supposed to be. But it also makes sense because that is what the GSD is in its student body. We're approximately 50% international students and 50% domestic students, and so the fact that there would be that alignment with the student body also made a lot of sense. But I just can't imagine at this point not being global. Not that I don't think there's real advantage in focusing, and I think there's plenty of work to do in the United States, there's no question about it. And I think, we'd have a wonderful program if it was only domestic. But we're in such a global world, and it's just hard for me, being in such a global institution and, actively in conversation about what's happening around the world in the built environment and the natural environment. It just doesn't seem like we could continue to have the same dialogue, and the depth of experience, I think for the fellows has really ramped up because of that. And so I'm excited about our future and our sort of way of looking at our global footprint, but it brings about challenges which maybe, we can talk about. And I think I'm happy to face those challenges, but it does really put up some interesting limitations for us and opportunities.
So I want to talk about that a little bit because in its conception, the fellowship was very much geared at what were these very particular American urban problems. So as time goes, I suppose there's this globalization. This graphic in the showing currently sort of shows you how there's expansion in terms of like these cities are growing in many other parts of the world. So bringing in these other perspectives, let's say, does that perhaps compromise in some way the intent of the fellowship?
Well, in a sense, sure. There's always loss with change. So might we have a more pointed conversation about what's happening in American cities or what's happening to the American environment? Though it's hard to look at environment, regionally anymore. Yeah, would we have a different sort of conversation? I think we would have a different conversation. But as Jim points out, there's so much we need to understand in order to do our work, even in rural America. I think understanding what's happening in the global South, what's happening around urbanization around the world, and rural communities around the world, just doesn't seem like one can act effectively without having that broader perspective. And the fellowship is unique in the sense that, well, not wholly unique to fellowships, but unique within the school. Fellows live together in one form or another for 10 months. Either they're sharing a house or they're living in apartments in very close proximity, and they spend a great deal of time together. So you have the opportunity not only to learn about somebody who's coming from a different professional frame, but you have an opportunity to learn about somebody and a context that's halfway around the world. And that just, we don't get those opportunities too often in our professional lives, and maybe it's one of the very few opportunities, we offer one of the very few opportunities like it. So I think that that's been really important. But, the other side of it is it's impossible to get your arms around the whole world intellectually. And, from a practitioner point of view. So it's always, even the US is difficult, but when we start adding, the African continent and some of the other places where I think we have 2 fellows, because we don't have that many, our numbers aren't that big, and we haven't been doing that for that long, or haven't been doing this for that long, which is having international fellows. So really saying that we have some expertise or any deep insight as a collective is a false statement. However, we're much richer because of you, Tau, being a fellow, and Rahel in Ethiopia being a fellow, and I'm hoping and looking forward to having many more from the African continent.
Okay, so here we are now. Climate change and all the stuff that goes with it, big problem. Right at this moment, both this like health crisis on the one level, and what's a very sort of familiar set of protests. This is a poster from 1963, which is about anti-police brutality in the US. Same theme, protest in Kenya, same sort of set of issues really. Same issue, protest in Colombia, in Bogota. So at the beginning of the fellowship, these were the issues that it was supposed to tackle, to confront, and environments like these, issues like these were meant to be somehow this idea of like create a cohort of people that can be on the ground, have this sort of very different kind of thinking. When you look at half a century later and in the States alone, without even looking elsewhere, and you see the same theme sort of rerun itself. As curators of the program, if we were to give a super unvarnished assessment, what would you say is the success of this undertaking? And are there any things that the fellowship could have done better? Are there any things that alumni could be doing better? So how do you think of this very interesting sort of repeat that we're in at the moment?
Well, Tau,
this is to both of you. Jim, go for it.
I think given your wonderful and terrible slides that you've shown us in two different eras in our country's history, I think it would be hard for almost any organization or individual or institution to suggest that we've made a lot of progress. It feels very, very hard these days to believe that might be the case. And I am, as many of our watchers will know, pretty much of an incurable optimist, and I'm a huge fan of Dr. King's quotation about the arc of the moral universe bending toward justice. But what is true is that that arc does not bend on its own. It bends only through the efforts of all of us. And so what I would say, I guess, is in terms of individuals within our fellowship who became enlightened, inspired, encouraged to step up somewhat more than they might have been in the earlier parts of their career, I think the fellowship has done a wonderful job. There's many, many, many stories that we could tell of people who came to the fellowship with a lot of accomplishment, a lot of potential that have gone on to take big steps toward making a bigger impact in their arena, whatever it might be. Institutionally, I'm not sure that we are able to say that we've made much progress in that regard. And what I would say is this, and there's a little difference in the two eras in this respect, I think, Tau. I'd be interested in John's comments. I think in the late 60s, early 70s, when the fellowship was being founded, we may have regarded these issues of social justice, particularly around race and class, as things unto themselves. And you either worked on those issues or you worked on other things. And I think now, through the wisdom of so many of our wise critics these days, I believe we have learned that the work on these issues is supposed to be done by all of us wherever we reside in the fields that we work in. And what I hope, and I think maybe it's true, that we've learned that it's not whether I'm going to work on those issues or not going to work on those issues. The question we ask now is, how do we apply that lens to our work, wherever it may be? And that is, if we've made that level of progress, it's a tiny bit of progress on that long arc, but it's worth noting and it's worth paying attention to if more of us have been able to incorporate that lens into our own practice. John, what thoughts do you have?
Well, I don't have, I think you're right. I think if we look, we cannot claim any sign of success in a broad way. I mean, that would be absurd. The best we can do is our mission still, pointed in the right direction? Have we been able to support strong fellows who've done strong work in their careers after the fellowship? And then finally, are we continuing to demand of ourselves as an institution and as individuals serving within the institution of the fellowship, demand that we change and grow and learn how to serve this mission better. So I think you essentially have said that. I do think we have to seriously reflect on what role specifically we play. And I think we continue to do that, but I just feels more pointed and more poignant than ever right now. And myself and Anna and Quita, who make up the Loeb staff, are talking about these issues on a daily basis. So I think it's shoulder to the grindstone, but we also want to be doing that intelligently and not just soldiering on with whatever habits we've developed that seem to be pretty good. They have to be better.
Okay, we got a few more minutes to go before we take on some questions. I would like to encourage anybody that's got questions to feed them into the Q&A, and I will try to go through and feed to these guys as many as we can. But one last question, and I would love a perspective both from you, John, to start as the current curator of the program, but also from you, Jim, as somebody that has held this role. Where do we go from here? What could and what should the fellowship look like? Seeing that this very unfair set of slides I've just shared with you, it's a 50-year timeline. How do we avoid having somebody show a similar set of slides, be it around climate change or any of these issues, in another 50-year time, and say, what could we have done? So what is the future looking like, and what should it be looking like?
Well, let's just say right away, the Loeb Fellowship cannot avoid what the images may be in 150 years from now at our 100-year anniversary. Jim introduced this idea of humility, and I believe that's a very useful perspective. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't exhaust ourselves trying to change those images from 50 years from now. We should exhaust our creative abilities and our talents in that pursuit. But where do we go from here? So I'll just speak for myself. When I took over the fellowship, I had this sense that Bill and Jim had built a pretty lovely mechanism. It worked very well. Could it be improved? Of course. I can give you a long list of how I think it needs to be improved, and we're working on those things. But for the most part, it's a marvelous thing, and it had been doing you know, for the 45 years prior to me coming on as curator, it had been doing pretty much the same thing, only better every year. And I think that's absolutely true. I think there's real evidence of that. So for me, I was being, you know, I think I said at the 45th reunion, I think I said, it's like I've been given this marvelous vehicle all gassed up, and now where was I going to drive it? And for me, and it's been a you know, a long, feels like I've had time to do this, but there's still more time that's needed in order to realize what I'm trying to realize. I think we need to expand the fellowship. And I don't mean by the numbers of fellows necessarily. I think the footprint of the fellowship and its mission, the mission we serve, should have a more expansive impact. And so that's what I feel I need to do, because I've been given this extraordinary gift of this job, and also this quite exquisite vehicle that Bill and Jim and of course many others have constructed.
Jim, your thoughts on this?
Well, John's hit it right, I think. I do have a vision of our fellowship being more broadly known out in the world. Toward the end of my tenure, I used to monitor this. About 50% of all of the people who applied to the fellowship found out about it from an alum of the program. And in my estimation, that number is way too high. I want people to hear about the fellowship from their work colleagues, from their faculty people, from their family, from the newspapers, because I think that the way our fellowship grows in terms of finding the right possible candidates, especially those who aren't on the front pages of newspapers, is because it's more widely known. My guess is there isn't anybody in the newspaper industry that doesn't know about the Nieman Fellowship. But there are tons of people that work on cities and the natural environment that don't know about the Loeb Fellowship. So one thing I hope for in the future of the fellowship, and I know John cares a lot about this, and he's much better at some of the outreach strategies than I would ever have been. I would like more people to know, and that would mean we'd have a richer pool from which to choose for the people who will get to take advantage of the fellowship and then make an impact on the world after that. There's that, and I think the one other thing, and this is dangerous for me to talk about because it falls in John's bailiwick, but I do think the fellowship might spend more time these days being conscious of its efforts to encourage the fellows while they're in residence to apply that lens of racial and social justice to their work. I think we do a lot of that. I think we're sadly newly alert to how much of that should be about race in our metropolitan areas these days. But I think we can probably never do quite enough of that to begin to repair the damage that the last 400 years of our history have accomplished in this country.
Thank you both. Just going to run into some questions quickly. To start us off, there's a question from Eleanor White, class of 79, to John regarding international fellows. How have the immigration policies currently of the USA and the current administration in general affected the recruitment outside of the US? Maybe quick answer to that.
Yeah, it's made us very nervous, and we've been greatly concerned about this, and we've been in conversation with others at Harvard, at the university, to help ensure that we don't find ourselves not being able to accept a fellow or an applicant that we think is the right choice for us. But so far, other than some nail biting around getting visas on time, we have to date not found a situation where we weren't able to to include an applicant that we wanted. So far we've been all right, but I'll tell you, we're nervous about this, and it could have a huge impact. The next, this election may have a significant impact on our ability to get the fellows that we want internationally.
Question from Vivian 10, class of 88. Thank you, Jim, for being our institutional memory. The story about the Loeb Fellowship and its beginnings with the generous gift from the Loebs and Bill Doble's early stewardship never ceases to delight and inspire. How do we keep that story for future generations?
Well, I did type an answer to Faye about this, but others might want to know. There is an absolutely wonderful DVD of Bill Doble himself explaining this history. And of course, it was Bill's history. I never met the Loebs myself. I became the curator shortly after they died, and they were not yet doing the trips to their apartment in New York when I was a fellow. So I never met them. But Bill, of course, was very, very close with John and with Francis. And he tells this story. It was made by a videographer who was a Loeb affiliate in her class year. And the setting is the Doble house, with Bill explaining this history to the class that was then in residence. That's a really wonderful resource, and I think we ought to make sure that we hang on to that. I think John's got some copies of it in his office, and it's probably the kind of thing we need to keep moving into new technologies. Pretty soon there won't be any machines that will run it anymore, but it's the best resource of all of the early history of the fellowship.
So that talk, that presentation that Bill gives is actually accessible on the Loeb alumni website. So you can go there, and there's also his sort of acceptance speech, if you will, when the Doble Fellowship was created at the 40th anniversary. That's also viewable. And yeah, I encourage anybody who's interested in the fellowship's history. It's a must view.
I perhaps should just add as well, there's this oral history project that you guys have begun, which perhaps I saw an email earlier, so I just thought I'd mention that. A question from John Zeisel, class of 71. Apologies if I didn't pronounce that right. To answer the question of the Loeb Fellowship's impact, has anyone carried out a survey of fellows to determine what we as a collective have accomplished to combat inequality and other social issues after our double curve? If not, why don't we consider something like this? Either one.
Do you want me to answer that, Jim? Please. I think I know the answer from your perspective as well as mine. Unless you've been hiding this from me, Jim, we have not ever done that. I will say it is something that we're looking at, and I've looked at in the past, and we just simply haven't had quite yet the bandwidth to do it. But that's actually something that we're considering, and I would love to have that as an asset. We are going to do. We've committed to doing an assessment of the makeup of the fellowship over the 50 years. You know, who did we have as fellows, and you know, their background and that sort of thing. But this idea of impact on the world through the work that fellows did after their fellowship in residence year, that's a bigger task, which John Zeisel, the best I can say is that's on our want-to-do list, and hopefully we'll be able to do that in the next few years.
Let me just add one element to that, Tau. It's tricky on a couple of dimensions to do that. One dimension is, this may surprise you, but if there was a trait that I observed in fellows that always surprised me, it was their modesty. Several people would walk into my office almost every year and say, gosh, Jim, I really appreciate the fact that I'm here, but I realize there must have been a mistake by the selection committee. Clearly, I'm not in the same category as the rest of the people in this class. And I would have to assure them that was not true, which is to say some fellows will not know to mention the kinds of accomplishments they've made that, that have made a difference in the world. They will think that's just what I do. And in that regard, it takes an observer. And so to really get at this question of impact is a multifaceted area. You need to ask the fellows what they feel proud of. You need to ask the other fellows that have talked to them at various reunions and fall trips and so on, and the staff of the fellowship, what they know about these people, what they've done. And you probably need to ask some of their colleagues about what they feel have been the contributions of these people. So, John, I couldn't agree with you more that it's an excellent, excellent project, and to do it really, really well, we should be broad and all-encompassing, I think.
A question for you, Bob, from Bob Pack. He says there's been a sense that earlier in the fellowship's history, people who were relatively early in their careers were selected as fellows, and that later on, one has had to have more proven success to gain admission. What do you say to that?
You want to take that first, Jim?
Yeah, sure. During my time as curator, I also, every year when we selected the fellows, I would look at their ages and to take an average of the age of that class. And I would, the average age stayed pretty constant during my period as a curator. Around 43 or 44 was the average age. And that always, in most classes, that include somebody in their late 30s and maybe somebody in their early 50s or late 40s. And so I think the data might show us a little bit different than our impression. On the other hand, I did the fellowship when I was 35. So as an early member, maybe they were much younger in my day. And I would say two things about that. First, to the extent that people are getting older and therefore have a longer resume than they would have at 35, that probably makes an impact on the selection process. And I get that the selection committee may see some of those things as credentials. But I also want to say that the fact that somebody's 44 instead of 35 doesn't mean that there isn't still a lot of change in front of them, that there aren't still opportunities to grow, to change their career in a direction that they can make more impact. So I don't want this ever to be a capstone program. I think that would be clearly a mistake. We don't want to have this as an honor for what all you've accomplished. But on the other hand, I'm not certain that a few accomplishments mean that you're not able to do your growing and your changing at that crossroads that the fellowship so accurately, so wonderfully gives you a chance to do.
So very briefly, or I'll try to do it briefly, I think this is a mission question. I see both the value of younger fellows and the value of fellows that are more advanced in the mid part of their career. I think this is an impact question. And I can list for you fellows who are in their mid 40s whose work was radically changed by the fellowship experience in a positive way. I can also, of course, tell you about fellows who were in their early 30s who the same happened. So for me, it's a question of how do we impact the world? And is somebody who's in their mid 40s a good bet? In many cases, I think they're a very good bet. And in many cases, people in their early 30s are a very good bet. I struggle with this question. I'll say it right up front. I don't think that this is a simple answer. And I think there's value in looking at it in both ways. My default has been that we always have a range. We always have somebody in their early 30s generally. Let me tell you, we're not choosing people by age. I want to be clear about that. We are choosing people by where they are in their career, but many of those people, just to say it easily, are in their early 30s, as late as early 50s. Since I've been curator, it's been almost right on the button of 42, and it's always, I look back to see that. I don't actually, that's never a target. Yeah, for me, it's a mission question. How do we impact the world? And can we do it through this person who's in their mid-career? And I take that, I want to be serious about that definition, or this person who's in mid-career, and that may be early or late in my mind. But again, this is something I struggle with every year. I think through quite often.
Let me say one last thing, Tau, for those on the web today that are not veterans of the fellowship. The actual selection process is done by a committee. Neither John nor I, nor I think maybe a little more Bill, but not Bill either, have ever picked these fellows on our own. The current selection committee includes one member from each of the 3 departments at the GSD: architect, landscape architect, city planning, and urban design. It includes 3 Loeb Fellow alums. That
are selected by the alums.
One is selected by the current class, who picks somebody for next year, and the other 2 are elected by the body of the fellows. And for the last period of time, there have been 4 alumni on the committee, that is John and me. And then 2 people from outside either one of those cohorts. That is, they're professionals in our field, but they're not on the faculty of GSD, and they're not Loeb alums. So I like the diversity of that selection committee. And I have to tell you that they, in my experience at least, they never ran to the corners of their cohortness. The faculty members never said, we got to get this person because they could probably teach a good course. And the Loebs never said, we got to get this person because they live in the same city as Fred. It has always been a sort of a mutual effort by that set of 9 people to find the most talented 9 or 10 people who could most benefit from the fellowship.
We've got a few more minutes and a bunch more questions, so I'm going to try to get you guys to be very pithy.
Okay. No chance.
But I'm going to start with a difficult question here from Marcy Cohen, class of 98, 99. I guess that's your class, John. She says, how has white entitlement and paternalism affected the lack of success in eradicating racial and economic inequality? Simple question, 2 minutes for both of you.
Tau, can you ask the question again? I missed the beginning.
I'll read it again. She says, how has white entitlement and paternalism affected the lack of success in eradicating racial and economic inequality? I imagine the perspective of the fellowship on this rather than the global,
Yeah.
So you got 30 seconds, John.
Yeah, 30 seconds. We, as an institution, are a product of white supremacy and paternalism. And I am a product of that. We have suffered, I believe, in our history from this. We've done, by comparison, quite well. But that's not saying very much. And the last thing we should be doing is feeling proud. This is something that is an ongoing struggle for us, but I think you will see from the fellowship an increased interest and investment in how we can be less paternalistic and anti-white supremacy.
And I'm going to try to squeeze in 2 last questions. I know I've got a prompt that we should be wrapping up already. First question is from Janet Eckelman. John, could you clarify your vision for future fellowship cohorts? Is your vision to open all slots for global fellows, or do you envision a percentage reserved for US fellows? And I will just read out the next question. Maybe we do it that way just to save time. I've got a question from Deborah Morris, class of 2020. What are the thoughts on how this fellowship compares or relates to other built environment fellowships? She lists a few: Next City, Vanguard, Global Green, the Rome Prize, etc. Around issues, particularly around issues of resources for those younger than 35 versus older and more advanced people in their careers. So if we can just take both of those, I think they're very much about
I'll take
what
Janet
happens next.
Janet, at this moment, the only rule that I've said is that we have a maximum of 50% global international fellows. That feels right to me. I have no intention of changing that in the near future. I think that feels like a good mix, and I think the experience has been positive. And I don't see, as I say, changing that anytime soon. I think the world would need to change a little bit, or maybe the institution would, the university would need to change a little bit before I would reconsider that number.
And as to Deborah's question, I would just echo what John has said earlier. I'm glad that the Loeb sort of makes room for people who are half a decade or a decade further along in their careers than many of those other programs that sort of feature the person 2 years out of graduate school or what have you. But that always depends on the cohort of applicants every year. And so I'm totally confident that, and the selection committee often asks this question of, can this person use the fellowship? Will this help them at their particular stage with their particular interests? So for one person, the fellowship selection committee might say, it's just this person's not ready yet. They've got a few experiences to have before they're going to really ask the important questions in their field. And for others, they will say, this person's already won 3 different fellowships and 6 awards, and even though they're a star, they don't really need the fellowship. It's not going to make a big difference in their lives. And so it's a constant quest for who can really use the fellowship and who will the fellowship help. And that lens might get increasingly focused going forward on social justice questions. We've always had the reputation around the GSD as being the place where people like this show up. And I'm extremely proud of that. And I know John is too. But maybe that lens gets even stronger going forward as we become too late, but newly aware of how critical these issues are.
Thank you both. We've still got a whole lot of questions we haven't been able to deal with right now, but we got to wrap up. So John, if any last words?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody who's taken the time to attend, and those that have supported the fellowship, that are on this webinar, those that have been fellows who are on this webinar, and those that will engage us in the future. I do want to point out that this is, as you heard earlier, this is the first in a series that Tau is curating. There'll be other things from us during this year, our 50th year, something to pay particular attention to that's coming up on October, is it 8th? Let me just slide this over. Yes, on our Loeb Fall lecture. This is the first time we're doing this. We're moving our lecture to the fall and putting it on the public calendar of the GSD. Is at noon Eastern time. And our lecturer this year is Edgar Peterson, who's a wonderful intellectual and activist in Africa, around African cities, and a colleague of Tau's, actually. So please join us for that.
Correction, John. Quick correction, John. South Africa.
It's African cities, not just South.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm sorry if I said that. I meant to say his work is in African cities. Yeah, but from South Africa.
That's a wrap. Thank you, gentlemen. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.